A Shattered Sky. Part 1. A Trail in the Silence. The ground still trembled. Priest, pressed against the cold wall of the old bunker, waited. His Siva suit absorbed the tremors, not the deafening roar. The emission had passed. The most powerful in the last 6 months, judging by the shaking and the prolonged wail of sirens from nearby outposts. Now, silence descended. A deafening, heavy silence, like a prelude to something new and most likely very dangerous. Priest disliked emissions, not for their power, he was used to that, but because they reshaped the zone, altered familiar routes, birthed new anomalies in the most unexpected places, and old ones could vanish, or worse, become even deadlier. Yet, for an experienced stalker, it was also an opportunity, new artifacts, or something else. He cautiously peered outside. The sky above the ghost city was unnaturally crimson, as if blood had been spilled across it. The air hummed with residual energy charges. The Geiger counter on his wrist whined incessantly, showing extreme radiation levels. He would have to wait. An hour later, the background radiation began to subside. The Geiger counter settled into its usual anxious crackle. Priest emerged from the bunker. The ghost city looked different. Not just ruined, but altered. Some buildings seemed to have shifted off their foundations. Streets warped into waves. And everywhere, where previously there had been only scattered anomalies, now swirled entire fields of new, unexplored death traps. His gaze fell upon something in the distance. Above the former House of Culture, a thin, pulsating violet pillar of light rose from beneath the earth, straight into the sky. From that height, the pillar struck an invisible dome that seemed to cover a part of the city. Priest had never seen anything like it. This wasn't an ordinary burner or Electra. This was something new, something that had just appeared. And in his heart, hardened by years spent in the zone, a familiar feeling stirred. Curiosity, amplified by a stalker's thrill. He moved towards the source, cautiously, testing each step with his anomaly detector. He had to bypass new whirligigs that suddenly opened beneath his feet, and invisible jellies whose acidic nature was revealed only by steam and the smell of burnt rubber. But Priest was like a fish in water in this deadly labyrinth. He knew that the most valuable loot always awaited where others feared to tread. The closer he got to the House of Culture, the stronger the violet pillar pulsed. The air buzzed audibly, and his suit subtly vibrated from the unknown energy. He circled the building and discovered that a side wall of the House of Culture had collapsed, revealing an entrance to the underground. It was from there, from beneath the earth, that the violet beam surged. Priest paused at the edge of the chasm. He was reluctant to descend. Too much unknown. But something pulled him. This pillar, this invisible dome. It was a new phenomenon, and it could be the key to something very valuable, or very dangerous. He checked his rifle, tightened his backpack straps, steeled himself, and stepped into the darkness. The underground proved to be a complex system of old basements and technical communications. It smelled of dampness, mold, and electricity. The violet light below pulsed, illuminating the walls with ghostly reflections. Priest moved slowly, his footsteps muffled by the hum coming from below. After a few minutes of descent, he emerged into a large, circular hall. In the center of the hall, rising from the very floor, was the same violet pillar, extending upwards into the collapsed ceiling. Around the pillar, suspended in the air, hung several artifacts. They didn't resemble ordinary medusas or vivers. These were irregularly shaped objects, dimly glowing, and from them emanated a powerful, yet not aggressive, energy. These were new artifacts, freshly born from the Emission. Priest knew their value. He took out his artifact container and moved cautiously towards the pillar, ignoring the Geiger counter's incessant crackle. But he was not alone. From one of the side passages leading into the hall, two stalkers emerged. One was a burly brute in a heavy bulat exoskeleton, armed with a machine gun. His name was Sledgehammer. The second was a nimble, nervous type in a light suit, with a sawed-off shotgun in his hands, nicknamed Nimble, and by their satisfied smirks, Priest understood. They too were here for the new artifacts. "Well, well, Nimble," Sledgehammer boomed, aiming his machine gun directly at Priest. "Looks like we're not the only ones hunting after an emission. Priest, what brings you here?" "The same as you, Sledgehammer," Priest calmly replied, not lowering his rifle. "The emission brought new gifts. Only these gifts are ours." Nimble nervously racked the slide of his shotgun. "We got here first, and if you want to stay alive, you'd better get out of here while you can." "I don't think so." Priest slowly shifted his gaze from Sledgehammer to the artifacts hanging in the violet pillar. "The zone belongs to no one, and what's in it belongs to whoever gets to it first. And we've already gotten to it." Sledgehammer took a step forward, his exoskeleton clanking dully. "And we don't like being interfered with. Go on, Priest. Don't make us." Priest understood. The conversation was over. There was no reasoning with Sledgehammer. He was the kind of man who shot first and thought later, and Nimble merely followed his lead. But simply leaving, abandoning such artifacts, it wasn't in his nature. And he couldn't have known that these very artifacts were the key to a much greater mystery than mere loot. He tightened his grip on his rifle. "I don't think so," he repeated, his voice quiet but with a steel edge. "Either we share, or you'll die here," Sledgehammer interrupted him, raising his machine gun. And at the moment Sledgehammer was about to open fire, Priest threw a bolt directly into the center of the violet pillar. The bolt flew into it and vanished. In that instant, the pillar of light flared with dazzling white. The air in the hall hummed, and from beneath the earth, from the base of the pillar, came a low, guttural roar. The ground trembled more violently. The artifacts suspended in the air began to spin wildly, their glow intensified, and then, one by one, with a deafening crack, they broke free from the pillar's field and flew in all directions, crashing into the hall's walls. "What the hell?" Nimble cried out, shielding his face with his hands. "What have you done, Priest?" Sledgehammer bellowed, lowering his machine gun. His exoskeleton vibrated as if struck by a powerful blow. But Priest didn't answer. He watched what was happening in the center of the hall. The violet pillar of light began to change. Its edges started to blur, and from deep within the earth, through the light, unclear moving shadows began to emerge, as if something was forming within the very mass of energy, taking on menacing outlines. The sensation was as if the anomaly itself, disturbed, began to shed its skin, revealing its true, twisted nature. The ground beneath his feet heaved. Debris rained from the ceiling and cracks spread across the hall's walls, from which an unbearable cold and the smell of rusty metal emanated. Part 2. Beneath the shifting sky. The hall began to collapse. The ceiling vaults cracked, showering chunks of concrete onto the floor, raising plumes of acrid dust permeated with the smell of ozone and burning insulation. The violet light pillar, now distorted and chaotic, lashed from side to side, casting ghostly shadows on the walls and spawning small, sparking anomalies on the floor that immediately winked out, leaving behind only black, charred marks. Sledgehammer and Nimble, stunned, tried to take cover behind massive pillars, but it offered little protection. The anomaly, provoked by Priest's bolt, had spun out of control, turning the hall into a meat grinder. "Priest, have you gone completely mad?" Sledgehammer roared, firing at the chaotically appearing Electras. His machine gun spit bullets, but they seemed to dissolve in the pulsating light. Priest didn't reply. He leaped to the edge of the hall, his anomaly detector shrieking on the ultra-frequency. He saw debris falling from above, and the hall's walls crumbling, revealing new, unknown passages from which the void itself seemed to emanate. But this wasn't just chaos, there was a sinister, unseen pattern to it. The artifacts, flung from the pillar, now bounced wildly across the floor, colliding with each other and emitting short, dazzling flashes. Their energy, unleashed from control, was dangerous. Priest noticed one of the artifacts, resembling a crystal fragment, crash into a wall, creating a small but rapidly expanding zone where the air shimmered and objects seemed to dissolve. A jelly. Another unstable anomaly, consuming matter. And more such jellies were appearing. "We need to get out," Priest yelled to Sledgehammer, shouting over the roar and shriek. "This whole place is going to collapse." But Sledgehammer wasn't listening. He was trying to reach one of the discarded artifacts, the one that resembled a sphere of pulsating light. Apparently, he sensed a special value in it. He stepped towards it, but his foot landed in a newly opened jelly. Sledgehammer's exoskeleton hissed. The metal on his boot began to dissolve as if in acid. "Ah!" Sledgehammer howled in pain, trying to pull his leg free. Nimble rushed to him, trying to help. This was a critical moment. Priest could simply leave, abandoning them to the anomaly. But something inside him, perhaps years in the zone, where unwritten rules of survival were valued above all laws, or simply an unwillingness to watch men die, even enemies. He rushed towards them. "Don't pull, cut it," he yelled, pointing at Sledgehammer's leg. Nimble pulled out a knife, but his hands trembled. The anomaly was consuming Sledgehammer. No time. Priest snatched the machine gun from Sledgehammer's hands. It was heavy and unfamiliar, almost slipping from his grasp. But it was a powerful weapon. He aimed at the jelly and unleashed a long burst. Bullets impacted the anomaly, destabilizing it. The jelly hissed but didn't disappear. "Run! I'll cover you!" Priest shouted. He knew he was doing this out of sheer madness, or self-preservation. He had to buy them time. Sledgehammer, limping and Nimble, supporting him, dashed towards the nearest passage leading out of the hall. Priest, using the machine gun, opened fire on the emerging anomalies, creating a sort of covering fire. Bullets tore through walls, collided with invisible fields, causing new flashes and crackles. The hall continued to crumble. The violet pillar of light in the center now lashed chaotically. Its light pulsed, and it seemed about to explode. Priest saw that in its core, something was changing. New, even more alien forms were taking shape. He knew he couldn't last long. Sledgehammer's ammunition was limited, and against such a chaotic, anomalous energy, weapons were largely ineffective. He had to find a way to stop this, or at least slow it down. He remembered the bolt. It hadn't destroyed the anomaly, only provoked it. What if this heart of the anomaly reacted to something else? To specific frequencies? To specific energy? His gaze fell on one of the artifacts flung by the explosion. It lay just a couple of meters from him. A small, pulsating object resembling a crystal, emitting a strange, low-frequency hum. A resonator. That's what stalkers called them, a rare artifact capable of generating specific sound or energy frequencies. Priest lunged towards it, dodging falling debris. He managed to grab the artifact. It was warm and vibrated in his hand. He looked at the violet pillar and at what was forming in its center. Something enormous, something that could be the last thing he ever saw. He had only one chance. He aimed the resonator at the pillar as if it were a weapon, squeezed it in his hand, and activated it. From the resonator, a beam of pure, piercing energy shot out. It struck the very center of the violet pillar. For a moment, everything froze. The hum ceased. The pillar's light became steady and then began to shrink. Not collapsing, but shrinking, drawing back into the earth like a giant invisible whirlpool. Following it, the anomalies also began to disappear. Jellies imploded. Sparking discharges faded. The hall's destruction slowed, then stopped. Sledgehammer and Nimble, who had already made it to the passage, turned around. They watched in astonishment as the violet pillar of light slowly but surely retreated underground, leaving behind only a small, smoking crater. Priest stood in the middle of the hall, breathing heavily, holding the now useless resonator in his hand. The artifact no longer vibrated. It had fulfilled its purpose. He looked around. The hall was heavily damaged, but no longer posed a threat. He glanced back at Sledgehammer and Nimble. They looked at him with disbelief. What? What was that? Nimble finally managed. Priest shrugged. I don't know. Something the zone didn't want to show. And you stopped it. Sledgehammer, limping, approached him. His gaze was filled with respect, mixed with disbelief. What kind of tricks was that, Stalker? No tricks. Priest tossed the resonator aside. Sometimes the zone listens, if you know how to talk to it. He knew they wouldn't believe him, but it didn't matter. The important thing was that he had made it out. And the important thing was that he had stopped this anomaly. Part 3. Beyond the zone's edge. Sledgehammer and Nimble, despite what they had just experienced, hadn't forgotten their purpose. They quickly gathered the surviving artifacts scattered around the hall. Most were damaged or energy depleted, but a few remained intact. Sledgehammer, recovering from the shock, didn't even try to stop Priest when he approached one of the intact artifacts and picked it up. It was a small, translucent Medusa, glowing faintly green. Not much, but for a stalker it was still something. All right, Priest, Sledgehammer said, leaning heavily on his damaged exoskeleton. You saved our asses. Consider us even. But now, get out of here, and don't let us see you again. Priest nodded. He didn't want any more dealings with this pair either. He was glad to have escaped with minor losses. He looked at the crater from which the violet pillar had risen. Now there was only a smoking black pit smelling of ozone. The anomaly was gone, but it had left a mark and a memory. He slowly moved towards the exit from the hall. Sledgehammer and Nimble, breathing heavily, followed him. They had to make their way back through the labyrinthine underground, emerge to the surface, and somehow leave the ghost city. No easy task, especially with a wounded man. Priest chose a different path to avoid crossing them again. He knew an old, dilapidated drainage tunnel that led directly to the city's outskirts. The path was dangerous. The tunnel was full of mutants and minor anomalies, but now it seemed the lesser of evils. He navigated through the gloom, guided by the sound of dripping water and the smell of decay. Several times he had to engage in brief skirmishes with blind dogs, fighting them off with his knife and short bursts from his rifle. His suit was torn in several places, blood stained his skin, but he paid it no mind. The main thing was to keep moving until the zone left him alone. When he finally emerged to the surface, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in anxious orange hues. He found himself on the city's outskirts, among abandoned houses and thickets of wild weeds. Behind him, the ghost city loomed darkly against the setting sun, its ruins blanketed in ash that seemed to still fall from the sky. Priest didn't look back. He walked straight ahead, without minding the road, just to get away from this cursed place. He was exhausted. A cold, weary spark gleamed in his eyes. He had survived. Again. He hadn't found the phantom, the artifact that could have made him invisible, but he had encountered something far more significant. The very essence of the zone. Its ability to birth not only monsters but also something incomprehensible, living by its own unknown laws. And he, it seemed, for the first time in his life, had been able to influence it. Not just to run or destroy, but to calm it, suppress it. He stopped at the edge of a clearing, from which a view of the zone's boundless expanses unfolded. Far on the horizon, above the scorched earth, the faint lights of anomalies flickered in the air, and the wind carried the weak, distant howl of mutants. The zone was alive, and it was waiting for him. Priest took out his flask, took a long drink. The water was cold and tasteless, but now it seemed like the finest nectar. He looked at his hands. They were dirty, covered in blood and soot, but there was no tremor in them. He was himself, the person he had become in the zone. He didn't know what lay ahead. Sledgehammer and Nimble might remember this encounter, but that would be later. And now there was a new dawn, a rusty dawn over the merciless world of the zone. And Priest was ready to face it. He was ready for the next challenge.